I wanted to talk about the age of the Earth. There's evidence both ways for both a young Earth and an old Earth. But the most important question for me is when I woke up this morning, how important is it for me to know that the Earth is 6,000, 10,000, 20,000, 40,000, or 4.2 billion years old? Does it make any difference to me today? And as I sit here, I don't know. Like I say, there's evidence both ways, and we need to look at that and determine. As we looked at this model, we're trying to figure out when we put the story on the data, how best does it fit? The things that I can remember about the young Earth is carbon-14 is not in balance, and it has about a 55,000 year life cycle. So there's something that's going on there. And then moon dust. When the Apollo project went first to the moon, based on the calculations that they had, they put big feet on the lander module like this to help it land in what they expected was 30 feet of moon dust, rather than just a small lake or something. And the young Earth people were sure crowing when they heard this, that there wasn't 30 feet, but it was more like a quarter inch, and they're saying that that sure fit in the model. And then Circe, the world's newest island, there was some volcanic activity off in the ocean, and an island was born, and then they were out looking at it. I've only heard about this in the 1970s and 1980s on CBC. They were talking about this, and they were anticipating they were going to go out there, and they know how old the island is, but the radioisotopes that came up that they tested were far different than the Earth's ones, and they were far newer, but they were not nearly the age that at that point they were saying Circe should be. It was far older than that. They were coming up with a date of 150,000 years or some cool thing like that. And then there's things like the recession of the moon. The gravitational pull of the moon on the Earth creates a cycle that causes the moon to spiral out slowly, and based on gravitational forces it's possible to estimate how much the moon has moved away. They're saying something like in 6,000 years it would be no problem. The moon has moved out like 800 feet, but in 4 billion years the Earth would have started out touching the Earth as it went around in its orbit. So they're saying that this is wrong. And then the magnetic field on Earth, it's decreasing, and things like they're saying that Earth is only about 25,000 years old, and then the population of Earth, 6,000-year-old Earth is consistent with Earth current population. But if the Earth is 50,000 years old, it would have something like 10 to the 99 people on it. And tightly folded rock strata. You've talked a little bit about this, but solid rock, it cracks when it's bent, and some of the earth strata will do something like this, and it wouldn't do that when it was solid. It would crack, but it's bent. So they're suggesting that something has happened when the Earth was younger to create something like this. And those things were formed when the sediment was heated or before it got hardened. So there's some things like that. And then the supernova rings. There's a new supernova every 30 years. And there's 300 of them, so they're saying that this is reason. And then things like Jupiter cooling off. If Jupiter was billions of years old, it would have cooled off by now. Pressure into oil wells, but another big one was looking at the Grand Canyon. There's some work that's been done when near the Grand Canyon there was cavitation found in a spillway. The Glen Canyon Dam in 1983, where the Colorado River it flooded, and they opened some emergency spillways, and the volume of water that flew through there, it took out 3-foot thick concrete walls. They were damaged, and when the water was flowing through at 1,000 cubic feet a second, the process took minutes for the ground to shake and the water to turn red as the vibrations that were taking place with the water going through there, where there was a little bit of damage, and it created further damage, and then it just cycled and spiraled. It just took just a few minutes for it to go. So the young Earth, that's held by people like ICR, Morris, and Hovind. On the old Earth, they talk about isotope ratios pointing to the old, that there's a pattern that they know of uranium breakdown and other breakdowns, and then they're looking at the amount of these specific isotopes of lead, for example, with the breakdown of uranium, and the amount of this that exists is saying that there was a lot more uranium in the past, and the time is needed to create craters as well. This is held by the Journal of American Scientific Association, Hugh Ross and Greg Kokel. These are all Christians. And the Journal of American Scientific Association is where there's more people with PhDs in science than any of these other groups. And they look at this and they're pointing out that there's evidence for an old Earth. Again, there's uncertainty and we don't know. One thing that we do know is about the moon dust, that's an artifact. You probably knew this. And your Grandma Ents was absolutely right that the moon trip was false, but for entirely the wrong reasons. You probably know about the speculation that it was filmed in London with Stanley Kubrick being involved. And when you look at the lunar module, that there's 6 different shadows. And, this is something that's done in a studio, and if the sun was shining on it, there'd be only light coming from one direction. Whether Kubrick is involved or not, that's secondary. Whether the astronauts spoke much when they got back to Earth about what's happened, that's secondary. But what's the primary thing? The primary thing is the Van Allen radiation belt. As you go up in space, in the atmosphere, past the ionosphere, there's one belt that you have to go through to get to both Moon and Mars. It's called the Van Allen radiation belt. And if you went to the Moon and you went through the Van Allen radiation belt, then you'd have to be protected or you'd be severely irradiated. They said that they had corrected this, but there was an announcement that NASA made a couple of years ago that they are on the verge of discovering a system to protect the astronauts from the radiation in that belt and allow the ship to fly. They said any combination of lead and aluminum that they would have used before this would have not been light enough to allow the ship to fly. When I heard that, I said, gotcha. We know that if NASA is admitting that they didn't have the means to protect the astronauts through the Van Allen radiation belt, that they never went through there, the most that the astronauts would have done would be a lower Earth orbit, and they wouldn't come in from through the radiation belt. It wouldn't be coming from the moon, they'd be going elsewhere. So where it was filmed, when they're doing the moon stuff, it doesn't matter. It could have been filmed in the US, it could have been filmed in England, who knows? But it wasn't on the moon. And like I say, your grandma Ence was thinking that it was false, but she had different ideas as to why it was, based on the education that she had. But as we look at it, knowing about the Van Allen radiation belt, we know that what she'd said was right, but for the wrong reasons. Another thing we see is that the speed of light is slowing down. It was 3.1 times 10 to the 8 when it was first measured, and it's now 2.99. This is something that was predicted by Stephen Hawking. We thought that the speed of light was a steady state, but he is saying that it's related to the size of the universe. And when the speed of light is slowing down, then that's also involved in so many other calculations, including radioactivity breakdown, half-lives, and things like that. Valid research shows that it can stand the test of scrutiny, and if they need to adjust the model, they can. Health practitioners recently got onto the evidence-based practice guidelines bandwagon, and if something doesn't work, then they don't do it. So the last time that I was to a Pedorthic Association convention, someone had presented a new and not tested theory on production of arch supports, and he was shouted down by those who were more versed in research methodology, biomechanics, and other aspects of what he was talking about. No, I was not involved in that discussion. I just watched the people behind me yelling at the guy on the stage and vice versa. It was just very interesting to watch these people yelling at each other until the speaker got shouted down. In the same way, there's evidence that I can bring to my beliefs. You know about my examination of the Latter-day Saints and their idea that there is no historical or archaeological support for their story. Language, anthropological, archaeological. Evidence is just missing. In the Book of Mormon, they talk about the plains of Nephiha and currency like a shibboleth of gold. It's supposed to be in the heart of the U.S. according to Joseph Smith. This is the area where people have lived for hundreds of years and had been lived in since he was there in the 1830s and 1840s. But on the other hand, we know that archaeologists, even atheists and agnostic ones, will use the Bible to support their digging. For example, with the prophecy of Tyre and Sidon, and also with Jerusalem. So the second video was to talk about some of the stuff that you were talking about with certainty in life. I have to tell you that certainty is something that we don't find. A lack of uncertainty is a natural part of our life. City traffic is the number one that I want to leave with you. When I lived in Toronto, if I left at 5:30 in the morning to get to work going 100 kilometers an hour, I could get there in 40 minutes. If I left at 7:30, it would take 50 minutes, and if I left at 8, it would take 85 to 90 minutes. My landlord, on the other hand, he went to work at a different speed. He went to work at 150 kilometers an hour, and he got there much quicker than